Okay. Hi, everyone. So thanks for joining us today. I'm sorry for the delay. It is all about technicalities. Good evening, by the way, and welcome to DİPAM's online panel series. And today's session is Today's session seeks to offer some insight into the latest round of Arab-Israeli normalization process and its repercussions on Qatar and Turkish-Qatari relations. I am Associate Professor Esra Albayrakoglu, and I am affiliated with Bahçeşehir University, and I will be moderating today's discussion as one of the founding members of DİPAM. Normally we're supposed to be, 5 persons here. Hopefully, Mr. Giorgio Cafieri will be with us in 5 minutes or so. And let me proudly present our experts, right? And I'm pleased to introduce them. They are featuring not only a solid scholarly, background, they also have a field expertise in Middle East affairs. And they often illuminate us by appearing frequently in media outlets. So I'll skip Giorgio Cafier and I'll introduce him in a couple of minutes. And I'll begin with Associate Professor Mahjoub Zubairi. And he is currently affiliated with Qatar University, and he is the director of Gulf Studies Center. By the way, it seems that, Professor, you have made the most of the COVID process by producing a number of books, chapters, and articles, and I'm looking forward to reading them. So congratulations in advance.
Thank you. Thanks.
And next, our distinguished Professor Özden Zeynep Oktav, affiliated with the Department of International Relations at Istanbul Medeniyet University. She is also a very familiar face in media. And last but not the least, we have a young promising lady from EcoTurk. She is Feyza Gümüşlüoğlu. She has spent some time in Qatar, by the way, about 6 years, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
And she has been there for reporting, and she has contributed some weekly interviews for the Qatari Peninsula. Okay, so I would like to give the floor to Dr. Mahjoub Zubairi, right? Since he represents Qatar, I would like to know how you interpret the next round of Arab-Israeli normalization. Qatar is famous for pursuing a delicate balance policy among different actors, be it Iran, Turkey, United Arab Emirates, United States, and what have you, right? But do you really think that this, rapprochement between Israel and the United Arab Emirates would pressurize Qatar to take sides? I would like to know the issue, with respect to your opinion.
Thank you, Dr. Isra. It's a great pleasure to be with you this evening. If we go back to the developments happened in the recent weeks, it was obvious that Doha did make very clear view on that, and that was on the official statements that there is no normalization with Israel unless the international resolution has been respected when it comes to the Arab-Israeli conflict. This means the 242 and the 338 resolutions, which means basically going back to the border of 1967 and basically solving the issue between Israel and Palestinians. And more important, that Qatar will not accept anything Palestinians will not basically accept. So these are the two rules. These are the two pillars that Qatar has made it very clear in recent weeks. And this has been said by officials on a media statement. But this doesn't mean that Qatar is not looking at what's happening in the region. Qatar, at the end of the day, is an important player in the region. Is playing role in mediation or bringing stability and security to the region. Has a strong relations with the United States, and does understand the dynamics in the region, and does also indicate to the United States that we, as Qatar says, we doesn't, what we do, should not be received that we should approve everything Washington says. So there is sort of differentiation between being alliance or a friend of the United States or being actually following what the United States is saying. And that was obvious. I mean, even in a previous discussion between Doha and the United States over, for example, using the Iranian what's so-called airspace, the United States was not happy with that. But when they tried to put pressure in Doha, Doha was very clear that, give me an option. Give me an option. You are a friend of the Saudis, pressure the Saudis to open the airspace so we can use it. So the United States failed to do so, and Qatar continued to use the airspace of Iran until now. Now they try to push something so they can basically pressure Iran. So when it comes to the normalization, Qatari position is very clear so far. It seems to me also they are in favor of supporting the Palestinians 100%. And here, actually, I'm just footnote. They agree with Turkey on a principle that supporting the Palestinians and the right to have a better life, that's something they agree on. And that's the reason where we see, for example, Qatar contributed to the people in Gaza and trying to help people in Gaza, 1.5 million people there, and trying to support the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah. And I think this is part of what Qatar called its commitment to the Palestinian cause as an issue. It is it's part of the Arab matter. It's part of their own ethical duty toward the Palestinians as a whole. And I think that was applied in different stages, and we see the same discourse and the same narrative. Having said that, we have to remember also that Qatar, of course, is worried of what's happening between Israel and Emiratis, Israel and Bahrain, because those are neighboring countries. There are, of course, political challenges, security challenges. I'm sure that the decision makers are looking at all this and try to make a risk assessment how this can be tackled without basically affecting the stability of the country. Because bringing Israelis to the region, it's something basically complicating the whole matter and stability of the region. This is the first time where Israel will have a sort of recognition and have embassies and normalization, business relations. This never happened before. And the important thing, Dr. Isra, is that this happens in a time where there is a fragility within a GCC as a regional organization and the relation between GCC. So it comes in a time, that fragility basically will Israel will capitalize on that to maximize the benefit of that. So all of this together tells us that what's happening absolutely is a challenge. And I think, Qatar is trying to look at all aspects of that, trying to reduce all of the risks affected by influence or caused by all of these challenges. Basically.
Yes, definitely. We cannot talk about the GCC as a security community, but now the rift has been, widened even more. And this thing, Qatar has been renowned for mediating, among different parties and trying to, bring peace to the region. But now it seems that the United Arab Emirates seems poised to do the same thing, right? So this is another point of divergence. So Qatar is basically, insisting on the creation of a Palestine state with the capital of East Jerusalem and complete Israeli withdrawal. And, without this, the full-fledged normalization, despite extensive ties, would not materialize. Again, Dr. Zubairi, following up with you again, where would you put Iran here?
Yeah. Let me just here highlight 3 points about why Emiratis cannot succeed on what they are doing when it comes to the mediation, especially when it comes to the Arab-Israeli conflict. If you compare between Doha and Abu Dhabi when it comes to the relation with Palestinians, it was obvious there is doubts between Abu Dhabi and the Palestinian, whether the Palestinian Authority or Hamas or other Palestinian factions. This kind of things, when it comes to Doha, do not exist. There is level of trust and confidence and communication that absolutely helped Doha. Secondly, there is mistrust because of this move with the Israelis without consulting with the Palestinians. Doha, in all of its move, when it comes to the Palestinian, they coordinate with the Palestinians, whether the Palestinian Authority or Hamas and Gaza. And number three, the Emiratis, what they do, actually, the context of it is their own interest as the failure of what they are doing in the region. And the opposite, what Qatar is doing in the context, actually, of bringing peace according to the realities and try to say, we are not in trouble, we are not facing challenges, we are sincere of bringing peace. And those three differences make it, I would say, difficult to the Emiratis to play a mediator role. When it comes to Iran, of course, Iran is facing a real challenge. This is the first time in history that Iran's major enemy, Israel, is just behind the door. Iran built its own security theory on the fact that enemy should stay away of the borders, should not be even close to the borders. Now, the enemy behind the border, from the western border, and not the enemy, I would say, incompetent enemy. This is a very competent enemy. This is an enemy, has technology, has the leverage to do a lot of things from where they will be based in Abu Dhabi or Dubai or Bahrain. So Iran does feel the heat if this normalization goes ahead, and I think it's obvious that they are worried about what will be the ramification of on their stability. That is the reason why Iran sent a very clear message to the Emiratis and Bahrain that you have to be, careful. If anything comes from outcome of this normalization, you will be paid the price. And that was basically reflects to me the worry within Iranian political circle of this normalization. The second element, Iranians believe also that by bringing Israel to the region, basically you are creating a chaotic situation on the regional security system, which basically it's already chaotic because the Americans, they are not doing enough. And there is a fragility on the state of Iraq. And by bringing Israelis with all of this, I would say, power and the presence, basically you give the Israelis this kind of leverage. And this makes Iran really worried about what's happening. So I think this normalization put Iran in a very critical situation, especially in a time where there is a pressure of the United States, more sanctions, the economic situation is deteriorated, and all of this together actually add to the concern of the Iranian leadership.
There is also, there are also some rumors about the United States about to sell the United Arab Emirates F-35s. So this would complicate matters even more in terms of a military balance. So perhaps this would, lead Iran further to the arms of Russia, right? Which would, broaden the issue even more, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, thank you. Let us now talk a bit about Turkey's position, because now Palestinians, they pivot to, Turkey and Qatar for their cause, right? So they seem to have lost their belief in the perseverance of their Gulf allies when it comes to supporting their rightful, reason to create their own state. So, dear Professor Zeynep Oktar, would you like to contribute on this? Right.
Okay, thank you very much, Esra, and very much honored to be with you at this panel. Actually, Mr. Zweiri's points are very important for me. I also want to touch a little bit about the Qatar's mediation role and the Qatar's approach to this normalization. And I want to ask some questions about the normalization. What should we understand normalization? And then to skip to Turkish-Qatari relations, if you allow me. And what should we understand from the normalization of relations with Israel? Abraham Accord was made on 13th August 2020, as you all know, and it means exactly the establishment of full diplomatic relations and trade relations with Israel without having any solution to Israeli-Palestinian issue, whereas Qatar rejects the normalization of relations or establishing a full relationship with Israel without having a two-state solution to the between the to the Palestinian issue or between the Israel and Palestinian. And what, first of all, in my opinion, normalization, the word as a normalization, in my opinion, is not a normal one. It is abnormal, in my opinion, because this means the Israeli domination of the region. And these relations, and this is quite different from the ones made between in the 1994 and 1979. If you remember, there happened in the history two occasions which would lead to Palestinian-Israeli peace. But this one, I mean, this Abraham Accord, in my opinion, is quite different from these two previous occasions, just because, as I mentioned, this meant domination of Israel in Middle East and Gulf Peninsula, in my opinion. And Qatar also, from Qatar's perspective, normalization of relations with Israel is not a positive development for two reasons. First of all, in the Arab Peninsula, in the Gulf, Israel will be a rival in energy issue for Qatar, because Qatar, you know, is a very important energy actor, as having gas field in its waters. It is called North Dome, you know, and it shares these gas fields with Iran. And for Iran, it is called South Pars. And Qatar is boosting its output up to 77 million tons of gas each year. And this is a big, huge reserves. But Iran is handicapped in its efforts to expand production in South Pars, and because the international companies step away from making deals with Iran in producing outputs. Gas, I want to mean, because of the reimposed U.S. sanctions on Iran in 2018, and I'm very much suspicious of this. Will bring normalization of relations with Israel, will bring real peace to the Middle East. From Qatari perspective, I'm sure, as you also mentioned, that this will isolate Iran. And this will push Iran into the arms of Russia and China. It will consolidate its alliance with Turkey and Qatar. And normalization with Israel will change a lot of dynamics, both in the Middle East and in the Gulf. And the Abraham Accord reflects the Israeli design of the Arab lands, such as, for example, annexation of Golan Heights. And I'm just skipping a lot of things on my notes because of the limits of time. Sure. But maybe there are two important issues which I want to draw your attention. Palestinian problem or Palestinian statehood is no longer of central importance, not only in the Gulf, in my opinion, but also in the war-torn Middle East countries such as Syria, Iraq, and even in Egypt under Sisi, pro-US Sisi administration. And also the Gulf countries are not sharing the same interests with the Middle East countries, because they do not share border with Israel, and they never fired a shot at Israel. And therefore, the Gulf countries, I mean, Bahrain, we say, but behind the curtain, Saudi Arabia, I just understand from Bahrain, because you know Bahrain is completely under the control of Saudi Arabia. Although Saudi Arabia remains silent in the face of this normalization of relations with Israel, Mohammed bin Salman, as we all know, is quite happy with this normalization. But the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, such moves, I mean, normalization of relations with Israel, threatens Turkey as well, and Iran. Let me just say a few words about why Turkey, Iran, and Qatar is defined as malign actors in the region by many analysts, especially pro-US, pro-Jewish or pro-Israeli analysts, and as well as by UAE and Saudi Arabia, because Turkey is getting more and more powerful in militaristic terms. I mean, and although Turkey has some institutional links with the West, Turkey is still perceived as a malign actor in the region, because Turkey is getting out of the orbit of the West, for example, by buying the S-400 missiles from Russia. And Turkey has also military bases in 13 countries, including Somalia and Qatar. This also is perceived by Israel, United States, and these Gulf countries as threatening. And in my opinion, another point worth to be mentioned is that Turkey is supporting Muslim Brotherhood in the region, both in Syria and Egypt. And this automatically means for Bahrain and UAE and Saudi Arabia as supporting the terrorism. Because on identity analysis level, Turkey's support for Ikhwan and Turkey's support for Hamas very much threatening, but for especially Ikhwan is seen by Gulf monarchies as a movement having the capability of destabilizing Gulf monarchic structure of the region. Therefore, on identity level, Turkey is seen as a country destabilizing the region by supporting Ikhwan. In a similar way, Qatar also is supporting Ikhwan, you know, and therefore Qatar also is seen as a country destabilizing the region. Do I have a little bit more time just to continue?
Please take your time.
Okay,
Sure,
okay,
Professor.
thank you very much. Why Qatar rules out normalizing relations with Israel? The issue is not about the Israeli-Palestinian issue for Qatar, in my opinion. This is completely about Qatar's relations with Saudi Arabia and UAE. And Qatar's relations with Saudi Arabia and UAE is very problematic, as we all know. And currently, Qatar is following very delicate diplomacy, and doesn't want this normalization of relations with Israel affect its relations with Iran and Turkey in a negative way, and it doesn't put all the eggs into one basket. And Qatar wants peace which Palestinians accepts. Otherwise, it knows very well that this peace will not be an enduring one. On the contrary, it will destabilize both Middle East and Gulf Peninsula, Gulf region. And Qatar doesn't want Israel to be superior in the region, both as an energy actor and as a militaristic term. I mean, as a military actor, Qatar doesn't want Israel to dominate the Gulf region, and therefore wants to balance its relations with Israel and on one hand, and its relations with Iran and Turkey, and doesn't want to mar its relations with Turkey and Qatar at a time, as Mr. Zaviri already mentioned, it is under the siege of the Gulf monarchies because of the Qatar crisis, as you know. It still uses the Iranian airspace, you know. And lastly, but not least, as I mentioned earlier, Israel is a very important big rival, energy rival for Qatar in the Gulf. Israel also producing natural gas, but the Qatari natural gas reserves is the hugest one, and liquefied natural gas especially. But despite everything, this is very important. While I was reading the many articles and the latest news about Qatar, we should remember that Qatar is the first Gulf country which allowed Israel to have an office in Doha, and it doesn't want to mar its relations with Israel, and therefore I just mentioned that the Qatar, it follows very delicate diplomacy with Israel and doesn't want it, to cut its diplomatic cordial relations with Israel. For example, Qatar at the same time, in my opinion, will move at its own pace at normalization. In the end of the day, Qatar will not reject the normalization of its relations with Israel completely. I mean, wants to continue its diplomatic role and wants to play a soft power role in the region. And because we know from Israeli perspective, Qatar is very important country because it is the most effective communication channel between Hamas and Israel, and UAE is looks very difficult for UAE to play this role. I mean, mediation role, I mean, and to continue to provide communication between Israel and Hamas. Therefore, Qatar keeps its importance in the eyes of Israel. And when you just read the Israeli news reports, and you see Israel always tries to consolidate its relations with Qatar. Tel Aviv knows very well the importance of Qatar in the region, and but Israel, on the other hand, in my opinion, Qatar, on the other hand, may choose to create some difficulties for Israel to take advantage of the protracted crisis in Gaza, because this protracted crisis in Gaza also serves to the interest of Qatar to play a mediation role between Israel and Palestinians. Another thing to be mentioned is that the Palestinian young people also very much tired of Palestinian ruling class. They are very much complaining that Palestine cannot achieve a full peace with Israel, and I'm not that much sure whether the Palestinian cause is losing its importance in the eyes of the Palestinian young people. Maybe we can discuss this matter in the later parts of the panel. But let me just say a few words and finish my presentation about Iran. I also want the normalization with Israel is most threatening for Iran, in my opinion, because it will erode Iranian role in the Gulf. And it will, just like the Palestinian issue, Iranian role also will be weakened by the domination of Israel in the Gulf, and it will push, as I mentioned, into the arms of. It will push Iran into the arms of Russia, China, and Turkey is not that much happy about the Israel normalization with Israel, but. Just want to draw your attention that it is very interesting. In the meantime, some interests in some different disputes, Israeli and Turkish interests in some different disputes started to overlap with each other. In Eastern Mediterranean, in Nagorno-Karabakh disputes, for example, I see more or less some a rapprochement between Turkey and Israel, and this will for sure affect the normalization of relations with Israel in the future for Turkey as well. Thank you very much for your questions, and I'm finishing here. Thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you for your illuminating comments. Indeed, I totally agree with you when it comes to the energy dimension. You know, Qatar has just left OPEC so as to concentrate more on gas production in terms of LNG.
Yes.
And when, how to say, marketing them through the Strait of Hormuz, since it enjoys cordial relations with Iran, Qatar has no problems, right? But, you know, nowadays, Iran has been engaged in constructing a pipeline, right, so as to bypass Hormuz and just have to say deliver all its gas imports through the Strait of Oman, right? So this would definitely not harm Qatar at all due to good relations, but this would mean some kind of danger when it comes to other Gulf allies who just have to say isolate Qatar since June 2017. And moving on to how, you know, Ms. Feyza Gümüşlüoğlu views normalization, it is indeed very interesting because, you know, Qatar has been at odds with its Gulf allies by openly, you know, starting relations and deepening relations with Israel as early as 1991. But now when it comes to fully normalizing things, Qatar, you know, holds on to the brakes. So what's your take on this? And perhaps I may also ask you, based on your expertise in political economy, you know, what kind of prospects await Qatar and Turkey when it comes to defense collaboration? When you look at the statistics, you know, when it comes to defense imports, import-export relations, you know, I think Qatar ranks the second, right, on Turkey's radar. So it is a huge market for, you know, Turkish, you know, defense products. And do you really think that this new crisis would help further deepen, you know, military and defense collaboration?
Thank you very much, Professor. It's an honor for me to be with all the panelists here, Dr. Mahjoub and Professor Zeynep. Good to see them all. Actually, I will bring a kind of historical perspective. I will try to bring a little bit historical perspective also to the issue. Professor Zeynep already touched upon a little bit, but I want to elaborate more. Today we are discussing Qatar's normalization, let's say possible normalization with Israel. However, I think the question should be, well, shouldn't be Qatar will normalize or not with Israel, but instead it should be, well, Qatar's relation with Israel is abnormal. So let's try to focus on this question first. If we go back to the 90s, actually, it was in the 90s that the two Gulf states took the first step, and actually it was at that time quite daring steps towards normalization with Israel. And it might maybe sound surprising to some. Of course, you already know it here, but one of those Gulf states was Qatar. So Qatar was the first to normalize with Israel. And it in 1996, Israel by then Prime Minister Shimon Peres visited Qatar, and in the same year, Israel opened a trade office in Doha. So we all know that. And despite that, actually at that time, despite pressure from other Gulf and Arab states, Qatar had refused to close this office up until 2009, actually, which is quite recent. And also, despite pressure from other Arab states, Al Jazeera, Qatar-based Al Jazeera, had constantly invited Israeli figures, representatives, to its programs and had their opinions heard by the Arab public. So taking all these into account, today we are discussing, as I said, Qatar's normalization with Israel, but the relations are not really abnormal. I don't want to suggest that the full formal normalization with Israel, the kind the UAE did or Bahrain did, is not a huge step. I'm not saying that it's not going to be a huge step. Sure, it is. But what I want to say is that given this historical background, Okay, I think Dr. Mahcup is gone, right? Because
I think he has just muted.
okay. Okay.
I'm listening.
Okay, doctor, sorry. So what I want to say is that given this historical background, let's say, Qatar seemed to have been much more, let's say, a perfect candidate in the Gulf to take such a big step instead of the UAE and Bahrain, but Qatar didn't take this step. Why? Let's ask why, actually. Even though Qatar doesn't have abnormal relations, as I said, with Israel, it still doesn't take this step. So let's focus on why. Let's focus on reasons. For me, there are some reasons at this point for Qatar not to normalize, formally normalize, let's say, the relations with Qatar. The first, number one reason is the blockade, I think. Qatar is now under an economic blockade by the UAE and Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, of course, and accused by them of supporting terrorism. And this has been the case in the last more than like 3 years. So since the two blockading countries, the UAE and Bahrain, just recently normalized their relations with Israel, I think at this point, Qatar wouldn't like to follow the same suit, at least in the short run, simply not to be seen on their footsteps, let's say. So this was the number one reason for me. Second, from the early minutes of the blockade, two countries, actually, Turkey and Iran, stood by Qatar and provided, as you know, great diplomatic and logistical support. In Turkey's case, even military support. Turkey established a military base in the country. And it's well known, both Turkey and Qatar harshly criticized UAE's decision to normalize its relations with Israel. Turkey's President Erdogan himself threatened to cut ties with the UAE. So for many in the government circles in Turkey, the UAE's normalization with Israel is nothing less than a betrayal, actually, of the Palestinians. And in fact, many in Ankara use this word, betrayal of Palestinians. So Iran's reaction, by the way, was even harsher because President Hassan Rouhani, if I look at my notes, called the UAE's decision a huge mistake, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs described it as a shameful act of strategic stupidity. So Iran's reaction was even harsher. So given these harsh reactions coming from Turkey and Iran, as I said, two countries wholeheartedly supported Qatar during the blockade. It's, I think at this point, very unlikely that Qatar will go against and offend their extreme sensibilities of the topic, at least in this particular moment, I believe. Well, the other point we should raise here is, well, Turkey has also diplomatic relations with Israel. Nobody can deny it. And President Erdogan can be quite pragmatic when it comes to foreign policy. We know that. So Qatar might persuade Turkey on this point, I believe, when it comes to normalizing with Israel. But however, it will be much more difficult to persuade Iran. I don't know if Dr. Mahcup will agree, but it will definitely, it will be more difficult to persuade Iran than Turkey. Because also we should keep in mind that Qatar and Iran shares a huge natural gas field in the Gulf. We already touched upon the energy issue. So I think Qatar will therefore always be careful not to disappoint Iran as well, not only Turkey, but also Iran. Yet, I believe the pressure on Qatar to normalize its relations with Israel will build up, I believe, especially if President Trump wins a second term in the elections, definitely. And Israel and the UAE, also we can add Saudi Arabia to these, are now the members of the most powerful lobby in Washington, D.C. And this is also a very important factor, I think. And for Qatar, relations with the US is very, very important. So it will require superb, let's say, diplomatic skills for Qatar to manage these contradicting pressures and pursue its own path. So I think it will be difficult. And eventually, I think the normalization will come. Eventually, this is what I believe. This is my opinion. Also speaking for the Turkey-Qatar relations, and you asked specifically, military and defense relations. Also, I would like to raise one more thing. We should, I think, also consider this. While UAE and Bahrain are normalizing, with Israel, they are establishing a different path. They are following a different path. But I think, on the other hand, Turkey and Qatar now are trying to find their own way to find a solution to the crisis. And I call it more like a Palestine-centered solution instead of Israel-centered solution. How is it? Let me explain it in a couple of sentences. For example, if you remember, a counter move by actually Turkey and Qatar to help Palestinians overcome this crisis. 2 weeks ago, if I'm not wrong, Hamas and Fatah, they met in Istanbul first, I think 2 weeks ago, Professor, I think you both remember. They met in Istanbul, and immediately, it was immediately after the UAE's normalization with Israel, by the way. This meeting was immediately after that. And in Istanbul, they agreed they agreed to hold an election in Palestine. And after the meeting in Istanbul, they flew to Doha and they met the foreign minister, Qatari foreign minister. So Turkey and Qatar are also working to strike a deal, actually, between the two major Palestinian factions, Hamas and Fatah, I think. And so the time will tell whether Fatah will not bow to the pressure from the US and Israel. But if I think Qatar and Turkey mediation, let's say mediation efforts succeed, I believe it will be an alternative path to the normalization with Israel. A path maybe will be more beneficial to the Palestinians, and it will be, as I said, more Palestine-centered instead of the Israel-centered normalization process that's taking place in the Gulf, rest of the Gulf. Thank you very much. I think I'm done for now.
Okay, that's great. Let us now play the devil's advocate. So there are some opinions saying that, okay, we shouldn't be taking this normalization seriously. It's just the American charm offensive at the time of elections. And some say that there are already, differences of opinion as to Israel's and United Arab Emirates' approach towards Iran. For example, indeed, Abu Dhabi is very much disturbed with the offensive stance by Israel. And more or less, it is more in favor of, pursuing a low profile when it comes to confronting Iran, right? Rather than, full-fledged pressurizing on Iran. Abu Dhabi is more happy to pursue a moderate, a delicate, balanced policy. But now, since they are normalizing relations, perhaps Israel might also pressurize Abu Dhabi to take a more, offensive action vis-a-vis Iran. So perhaps in that case, the United Arab Emirates may not have the courage, to raise the bar and, make a full-fledged enemy out of Iran. So perhaps now this normalization would just fade away. So what would you think about this, Dr. Zuhairi?
It's obvious.
Do you see any prospect when it comes to this normalization? Should we take this seriously?
Look, we have history tells, and we always say to our students, history tells, history teaches. History told us that there was a normalization between Egypt and Israel, between Jordan and Israel, between Palestinian and Israel. And none of those normalization process actually taken seriously from the ordinary Jordanian or Egyptian or Palestinians. They still perceive Israel as an enemy, as an occupier. They still perceive Israel as some, occupying an Arab land. So this normalization is an elite to elite, is a group to group, is politician to politician. It's been not being cascaded, not being coming down. So to convince ordinary driver, ordinary professor, ordinary doctor to go to travel to occupied Palestine, for example, and say, it's normal. No, it did not happen. So I think this can apply on those normalization. But what's interesting here, there's a geographical aspect. Where is Emirat and where is Palestine, and where is Bahrain and where is Palestine now? This is brings an important question. Normalize for what? What is the outcome of this? This even if you live 1 million years without Israel, without normalization, nothing will happen to you. Those are, maybe someone will come and say, advocates say, those are a neighboring country. Jordan is the neighboring country, Egypt is the neighboring country to occupied Palestine. So they have to do this because it's about survival. It's about, you can explain it politically, whatever you can say. But what is this normalization? What this will bring to the Emiratis? What this will bring to the Bahrainis? Yeah. One can say, for example, economy. Okay. What did Israel presented economically to the Jordanian economy, to the Egyptian economy? What did actually they bring with the normal relations, not normal relations between Turkey and Israel? Actually, you can answer this question, not me. I mean, there's a lot of evidence that the Turkish side were more actually active. It comes and they have, I would say, the upper hand comparing with Israelis. So that's an important issue we have to consider. So I don't see there is this kind of normalization will bring a lot to those two countries. I think who will benefit from that? Politicians, politics, government. They try to sell it to the citizens. There will be a group of people who will benefit. We always know that. There will be a business who will flourish. But what, the recent history did confirm to us, did have those kind of normalization have no impact on people's life. Actually, the opposite. The economy of Egypt deteriorated after the normalization with Israel. The same applies in Jordanian economy, and numbers tell. I mean, anyone can Google now and can give you a lot of numbers about this, because you cannot compete with the Israelis basically products, whatever you do. So I have great doubts about whether this kind of normalization will bring a lot or bring even the minimum of expectation. I think this is this decision is being taken by a group of people. I would maybe in the I would say the hands finger 5 people, or maybe the 2 hands finger. I think these kind of decisions taken for specific interest, maybe for short term, maybe just to move beyond the crises or something. I'm not convinced that this kind of normalization, based on recent history, will have any serious impact on ordinary people's life, and even on bilateral relations.
I totally agree with you. You underline the need for reconciliation. All the peace deals concluded between Egypt, Jordan, and Israel. It just only helped to end the fighting, but nothing else, right? The societies, did not, welcome each other, right? There was not a reconciliation. So without this reconciliation, this Arab-Israeli dispute would go on forever. Let me also ask you another question pertaining to Israeli policy. Netanyahu simply underlined that, okay, I'm just signing the deal, but this is not a strict, promise saying that Israel would, just stop, making further settlements. It's just a break, right? So what would happen, in your opinion, if, Israel, continued, erecting more settlements, or, engaged in, hot fighting again with the Palestinians? What would be the Qatari position on this?
Again, according to the what we see, official statements, it's obvious that they will do all of their, in hand of sources to support the Palestinians, relying on I think, 2 or 3 things. One, respecting the international resolutions. Secondly, capitalizing on the relations with alliances, the United States, others, and maintain the fact that more, rational solution for this matter will bring more stability. Irrationality of solving this matter will bring more instability. I think this is the rationale they are saying it, that, if you enforce solution, this will not bring stability. If you don't bring people to the table and they can have benefits both sides, you cannot force peace. Peace can be done when 2 parties are convinced that they will benefit from that. And based on that, I think based on these 3 elements, that I think they will move in that direction. People, they should work together. Any enforcing any kind of imposing solutions will not bring stability. And I think that was the situation so far. Solutions imposed did not lead to peace and security. Actually, the opposite, lead to insecurity and instability and more fragmentation and more actually fragility on different levels in the region.
Definitely. Okay, another question for you, Professor Zeynep Oktay. Again, following up with Israeli policy, if Israeli breaks the promise and hurts the normalization process and once again engages in fighting with the Palestinians, what do you think the Qatari and the Turkish position would be? You have to unmute, Professor. You have to unmute yourself.
Thank you for this for your question. But as you already mentioned that Israel is not promising just to stop, annexing new lands about West Bank. It just, Netanyahu, if I'm not wrong, openly mentioned that they are freezing the annexing the West Bank, and so we are not expecting the Israelis very positive steps will be taken by Israeli ruling officials, stopping the annexation of the new lands and the West Bank, such as West Bank. But I'm expecting that this will encourage Israel just to control the Palestinian lands furthermore, and I'm not expecting that Turkey and Qatar will want to mar their relations with Israel. We are, none of us, I'm sure, are expecting any hot war or conflict or military conflict with Israel. Among Israel, Qatar, and Turkey, diplomacy will be functional, in my opinion, because in other disputes, as I mentioned during my presentation, in East Mediterranean, in Nagorno-Karabakh, and in the relations with Iran, for example, the actors such as Turkey and Qatar always reshaping their policies every time, because there are many developments taking place in different parts of the region. In Libya, in Eastern Mediterranean, right now it's very recent problem, Nagorno-Karabakh, for example. Azerbaijan and Israeli relations are very close, especially in militaristic terms, and Azerbaijan is very much supported by Israel militarily. So in this respect, you see Israel wants to have some kind of rapprochement with Turkey. I can give you an article from Jerusalem Post newspaper. They openly, not openly, maybe cowardly, but they say that we are selling herons to Azerbaijan, and Turkey also producing armed vehicles, SİHA. What is it in English, Esra? I cannot remember right now. SİHA. Armed
drones.
drones.
Unmanned
Yes,
aerial,
I couldn't.
Unmanned
yes,
aerial vehicles.
Unmanned aerial. I couldn't remember the drone. Herons also. Once upon a time, we used to buy from Israel herons, if you remember. Now we are producing our herons, our unmanned vehicles anyway. And so Qatar and Turkey will not approach to Israel in militaristic terms. I just want to mean that the diplomacy will be efficient in the relations between Israel, Qatar and Turkey. But when it comes to relations between Israel and Iran, I'm not that much sure that Iran and Israel will conduct their relations only in diplomacy. I mean, maybe there can be some hot conflicts between two of them because Iran insistently wants to survive militarily in Syria, for example. This is also a big problem. And so to what extent Qatar and Turkey will support Iran in Syria, I'm not that much sure. The dynamics are so easily changing, and the very volatile relations are dominating the region. Therefore, we have to always think again and again over the relations between these three actors: Qatar, Turkey, and Israel. Iran, Turkey, Israel. These are three non-Arab countries, and their relations are very unique, therefore, because from the Arabs' perspective, they are always externalized and not included within the Arab Middle East as a region. And in the Gulf also, Turkey and Iran also is not that much included as a real actor in the region. And Turkey, especially in relations with Turkey, all the Gulf monarchies have some historical baggages because of the Ottoman period. So I don't know to what extent I can give answer to your question, but let me just summarize by saying this. In relations with Israel, neither Qatar nor Turkey wants to come to the edge of war with Israel, just for the sake of the Palestinian-Israeli issue. This is my opinion.
This is my opinion too.
Yeah,
Okay.
really.
My opinion too.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So my next question perhaps would be for Ms. Gümüşlüoğlu. Turkey-US relations is on a roller coaster for some time. And can we say the same when it comes to US-Qatari relations? Qatar desperately needs a security umbrella, especially after the crisis that began in June 2017. And we have this defense cooperation, security cooperation between Qatar and the United States. They have indeed launched a strategic dialogue, right, in 2018 to put an end to this rift among the GCC allies. And we have this date base, strategically very important, both for Qatar and the United States. Do you think that, this relationship would suffer if the United States would pressurize Qatar to take sides?
Well, it's a good question, Professor. Well, relations with the US for Qatar is above everything, let me tell you that. And I don't know what Dr. Mahjoub and Zeynep will think, but okay, Qatar, of course, has great relations, excellent relations with Turkey, but the relations with the US, no matter which administration, be it Obama, Trump, whoever, I mean, relations with the US is definitely above all for Qatar. So I don't think Qatar will, I don't think the relations will suffer and Qatar will take a risk, for its relations with the US just for the sake of this issue or any other issue. So, but for sure, as I said in my presentation also, especially if Trump wins, because we know that Trump is very keen on this normalization process with Israel. So that's why I'm saying that, especially if Trump wins a second term, I think the pressure on Qatar will definitely increase to formally normalize with Israel. So at that point, we will see. It's gonna be quite interesting to see. We will all see. But as I said, eventually, I believe this formal relations will also take place between Qatar and Israel. I think it will happen one day. And also, as I said, you know, but as I said, I mean, the relations with the US is very important for Qatar. So definitely they will not harm these relations, but they will try to use, as Professor Zeynep said, diplomatic channels, because Qatar is very good at that. Unlike Saudi Arabia and the UAE, Qatar is more like, you know, let's say a soft power in the region, and it's using more diplomatic skills, soft diplomatic skills, to many crises, including Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And as I said also, I think they are also trying to find that kind of alternative process for this normalization with Israel. So I think Turkey and Qatar also are on the same page on this issue, and they are working on a different alternative path, as I said. So we will see after the elections. Definitely, things will be more clear.
Yes, it is very hard to talk about the future, right? You know, everything seems to proceed on a very shaky ground, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh, okay. My question for all of you: do you think Turkey and Qatar would align themselves more with the Palestinians in terms of financial assistance, humanitarian assistance, diplomatic, you know, backing in international platforms? Would we be seeing such a more visible kind of, how to say, guardianship on the part of Qatar and Turkey when it comes to the Palestinian cause?
I believe definitely.
I don't see any reason that Doha and Ankara would change their position towards the Palestinian issue. There is no reason, because politically speaking, the two countries are winning ethically, politically, and the image of two countries is gaining a lot within Muslim Arab societies. So there is no reason to change that course. Basically, that is something they do it. Ethically is winning. Politically, you are winning. Politically, you are an important player. You are connected with all Palestinians, whether the Palestinian Authority or Hamas or other groups. So these kind of connections gives provide the two countries with the strength in diplomacy. They are not crossing any kind of red lines on this kind of relations and communications. And I think it is wise actually to maintain this because this actually reconfirm and reassure the importance of two countries in stability and maintaining stability in the regions. Each country has its own cards to play and put on the table and propose. And I think when they work together, those cards can be more stronger and more influential actually in different files.
Okay. Can I say some few words over this question?
Please do.
Esra Hocam, what I'm observing right now in the region is that Israel and the United States will more and more pressurize Qatar to join Bahrain and Saudi Arabia and UAE, and Israel will do its best just to normalize its relations with Turkey, because this is a kind of struggle just to keep Turkey into the orbit and not to push it into the arms of Russia and Iran. This is very important for both Israel and the United States. This is my view. And just like Turkey, they also want to include Qatar into this alliance group. I mean, not maybe alliance is not a good word. I mean, not reflecting the truth, but to some extent, the distribution of powers are just always being reshaped in the region. For example, Russia, Iran, and Turkey's Astana process is very, very negatively perceived by United States. They don't want Turkey to act together with Iran and Russia, and they never want Qatar to act together with Iran in sharing Pars natural gas field, for example. If I'm not wrong, Qatar Crisis, for example, came out just because Iran and Qatar in energy shared these reserves. And if they produce these natural gas reserves, they will be a big rival for Israel in the region. Right now, what Israel wants to realize is to control. In the Middle East, you cannot see any Arab country having the capability to come against the Israeli annexation of any Palestinian land. I mean, there is no more Arab pact that would come against Israeli aggressive policies. In Gulf, you see UAE and Saudi Arabia acting since 2017 together with Israel. They are quite pro-Israeli. In this framework, Qatar and Turkey is gaining more and more importance for Israel, especially Israel. Israel and United States never wants Qatar and Turkey to be in together with Russia, Iran, and therefore I just emphasize Turkey's institutional links with the West. And therefore, I emphasize Qatar's diplomatic efforts in finding a solution to Israeli-Palestinian issue. And Qatar, very excellent, very good at diplomacy right now. Qatar is very important actor, diplomatic actor, and they are playing this role very efficiently when compared with UAE. UAE never can play such a role in Palestinian Israeli issue because I don't think that the UAE is acting very cleverly in both in Middle East and in the Gulf. But Qatar quite clever, and I believe that they will continue this delicate diplomacy in just to keep the balance of relations. And I don't think that the Israel and United States expect Turkey under Erdogan's administration will have a full rapprochement with Israel. But from Ankara's perspective, having better relations with Israel is gaining more and more importance for Turkey's national interests in energy and in every security and in different geographies, especially in Eastern Mediterranean. Let me finish with saying that thanking to Mr. Zubairi and Feyza, and this panel is very much illuminating for me. Thank you very much.
Me too. Thank you for your comments. And do you have some last comments to make, Ms. Gümüşlüoğlu?
Well, the two great professors almost covered everything.
Now, by the way, I'm looking at, in order to make justice for our viewers, I'm looking at the questions, but it seems that we have covered everything,
Yes,
right?
With
all due respect to the viewers, I can 100% say that all the questions have been answered in a very thorough manner, right? So thanks for watching us, by the way. So if you have any last minute comments to make, I'll be happy to.
If you
yeah, please.
Just quick. I mean,
please, of
quick,
course.
Two quick tweets. One, these are unfolded events. It's still. I'm not sure they are. Still are developing. We should expect changes. We should expect developments in different stages. And the second element, I think, we are entering a time of uncertainty. this uncertainty has to deal with the election in the United States and who will be the next president. This will influence the whole thing, and this will have a great impact on the future of this normalization and whether there will be next to come or actually we go to a frozen stage of this process.
Perhaps we have to hold another session
Yes.
in line with the
Absolutely.
outcome of the elections, right?
Yes. Yep.
So thank you each of all
Thank
for
you
your,
too.
illuminating contributions. And
Thank you so much.
I would like to once again thank to our audience for joining us. I hope it's just answered your questions. So looking forward to meeting you in other occasions. So enjoy the rest of your week.
Okay.
Thank
So
you
looking
so
bye.
much.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you very much,
Thank you,
Professor.
guys. Pleasure being
See you,
with you.
Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You too.
Take
Good
care.
night.
Take
Take
care.
care.
Bye
Wassalama,
bye.
You
Doktor.
too.
Bye. Masalama. Bye. Bye.
Hocam kapatıyorum ben de.
Lütfen.
Tamam.
Görüşmek
İyi
üzere
geceler
hocam.
herkese.